Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Water Policy Committee for April for the City of Aurora. Uh, my name is Alison Coombs. I'm the Vice Chair of this committee, and I'll be temporarily chairing until Councilmember Sundberg gets here. We are starting the meeting, calling the meeting to order at 10:37 a.m. And our first item of business is approval of the minutes. So and Councilmember Sundberg is here. So I will hand that over to him.
Thanks for starting, and thank you for your patience, everyone. I had to enter a password from my phone here. So let's see, approval of the minutes. Any changes recommended?
That's good.
None from me.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Moving on to consent items. Steve Fiore with the construction change order report, please.
Good morning, everyone. Two small change orders to report on this month. First one is for the Brantner ditch to the Brighton ditch augmentation structure. So this diversion structure, it's really kind of a system of pipelines, flumes, and gates, but this structure diverts water from the Brantner ditch to the Brighton ditch. And what we found a lot of times with construction is that once the structure was built, it had a couple safety issues associated with it. So this change order was to add some grading on the structure to keep people from falling into some areas that we don't want them to fall into. So the change order is pretty small, less than 1% of the project at this time. My understanding is there will be an additional change order, probably not much bigger than this, but it will be for some additional safety enhancements on the structure just to keep our staff safe. The second change order to report on is for the North Campus Communication Improvements Project. So this particular project is lowering of 2 miles of the long haul fiber that we installed during the Prairie Waters project. So this is a very important piece of infrastructure for our North Campus, all the way through the pump stations and down to the Binney plant. 2 miles of it were lowered specifically in Weld County at the Cicada Farms location. Over the years, they just continued to hit it. So it was lowered to a substantially deeper depth to keep that out of harm's way. And the change order was to add an additional handhold, which is kind of like a manhole and say in a pipeline system. It's just a junction point where we can pull fiber from 2 different directions. And then for some additional potholing that was needed. Unfortunately, a lot of times when our projects go out to bid, they're kind of frozen in time, but that doesn't mean the construction around the area ceases and all that. So sometimes additional utilities will be installed during the time that we bid a project and start construction of a project. So some of the monies were for us to go out and identify where some of these new utilities have been installed so that we could see that they weren't conflicting with our project. So this one was a little over our 5% target as far as change orders, but it is the only change order on the project. The monthly change order percentage looking good, under 1%, so below our 5% target. So that's all I had. Any questions for me?
Any questions for Steve? Nope. All right. Well, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
And John with a water supply update.
Good morning, everyone. Well, let's see, this update was through the end of March. We did see a little bit of snow down here in the city, about 5 inches according to the weather station at the airport. We are holding at about 53% of overall storage right now, and things are starting to melt. And so we've got some inflow coming into Spinning Mountain Reservoir. It jumped quite a bit at first, but then it got cold again up there, so it slowed down a bit. So, which is good because the bulk of our water rights up there won't kick in until May. So we're getting a little bit of water right now, but we got a lot more water rights that'll come into priority in May, and so we can keep the water up there until then. That's good. Let's see, snowpack. Give you an update on the snowpack. We in the report, I've got some graphs, but I just pulled them this morning for the snowtail sites that are particular to the collection systems that we have above Spinney and in the Colorado and the Arkansas. So in the South Platte Basin, those snowtail sites are down to 71%, not stellar. And the Arkansas Basin is down to 80%, and the Colorado Basin is down to about 100% of snowpack average based on those snowtail sites. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight. If there's any questions.
Any questions for John?
I do.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember.
And sorry, here, of course, the dog starts barking. Hang on one sec. Yell at him. Okay. Yeah, on the Aurora Reservoir is full, right? And then Spinney is whatever, 53% or something.
Spinney's about
45.
50%. Yeah.
And then the other reservoirs, they look like they're really small amounts of acre foot reservoirs. I mean, other than Homestead, Spinney, and Aurora. Is that right?
Relatively speaking, they're significantly smaller.
So how come Homestead State is so low?
We've been moving a lot of water over from the Colorado, Arkansas side of storage into Spinney Mountain Reservoir to try to bring that up. Spinney was a lot lower earlier this winter, and so it's been coming up a little bit as we move that water over. Unfortunately, demand has been relatively stable for right now. We've had a little bit of moisture down here, and so I think that's in some colder weather that's kept people from turning on their sprinkler systems. So we hopefully will get a little bit of rain and snow tonight, and that'll push it out another week. So that's all good.
So it doesn't have anything to do with what other users are using, because we share with Homestead.
Oh no, that's our space. Yeah, that's just
That's all
our
ours.
water and our space that we're moving over.
Okay. And then so that was interesting what you said about the flow of water, and that it actually benefits us the later it flows because of our water rights. So that I just found that really interesting. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Any further questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
So looking at the drought map, it looks like one of the areas that's in kind of moderate to severe drought is in the area of Rocky Ford. How is that impacting our operations and our water rights there?
Well, I know we are yielding from the Rocky Ford ditch right now. I'm not the best person to speak to that. I don't operate down in there in that area. Maybe somebody else wants to chime in, but
and I know a little bit. Our water rights and what yield for, oh, Rick is here. He knows a lot more than I do. So we'll let Rick run with that.
Well, if I understand the question, you're talking about the drought map and how dry it is in this area. But the water that Aurora gets from the Rocky Ford ditch comes from the mountain supply, and so that has to flow down into this area. But that is coming from the mountain supply, and that mountain supply is not up to that 100% this year, but Rocky Ford ditch is a very senior ditch, and so we expect to have fairly good yields from the Rocky Ford ditch this year, as we do every year because of the seniority on that ditch.
Great, thank you. That's what I was wondering, is like the water isn't coming from there, so is that dryness impacting us? So thank you for clarifying.
Rick, would it be accurate to say that drought conditions in Rocky Ford affect our Arkansas water rights and yield, kind of similar to how a drought in Aurora would affect our South Platte, maybe water rights. It's not a direct impact, but higher, drier uses would affect a little bit how people use water in Rocky Ford and could affect yields a little bit. Is that accurate?
Very, very similar. Yes. That is why there are ditches in the lower Arkansas basin, because it's much drier in this area. And so they're using that mountain supply during the growing season. And so yes, that would be a good characterization.
Fantastic. Well, that's my.
Did we lose you, Councilmember Sundberg?
Apologize for that. Any more questions for John? All right. Thank you, John.
Welcome.
Appreciate you. Moving on to item number 3, First Amendment to the Irondale Gulch Outfill System Plan IGA from Sam.
Hello all. Let me just share my screen very quickly. Okay. Thank you all for having me back again to speak about Mile High Flood District IGAs. I have the first 2 of this year to present to you, the committee. And I know that everybody on this call is familiar with the process, but I leave this slide in just in case we need to know where the IGAs come from. The first one, today, is for the First Amendment for the Irondale Gulch Outfall Systems Plan, the OSP. This was started in 2018, and our goals were to study the minor tributaries and piped systems, any outfall into the Irondale Gulch system to make sure that they were sized correctly and identify any detention opportunities. In the intervening years, Denver requested an additional scope item to increase the effort of modeling to include some 2D modeling in their section of the watershed. And this IGA is to reflect that Denver will be paying more into the project fund in order to accomplish their goal. Nothing more is being asked of Aurora at this time. Any additional questions? And does this committee support moving this amendment to regular council?
Questions from council members?
I'm good.
All right. Thank you, Sam. And Sam, would you like to pick up on number 4 for the 4th Amendment, the 22nd Avenue outfall to Westerly Creek Improvement Project?
I can do that. This IGA is detailing a capital project right around here in north western Aurora for street improvements and water quality within this area. We have 2 major goals on this project: to provide that water quality and to realign the channel to move now existing, at the time they were planned, properties out of the floodplain. For this IGA, Aurora Water, Mile High Flood District, and Parks are contributing more. They are increasing their contributions. At this amendment, Aurora Water is asked to contribute another $500,000, Mile High Flood District at $920,000, and Parks a cumulative total of $1.35 million, $750,000 of which are coming from an open space grant in Adams County. We are sitting at a total project budget right now after this amendment at 7.7 million-ish, and the total cost is estimated to be around 12. So there will be a few amendments after this one. Any additional questions? And does this committee support moving this IGA forward to regular council?
Sam, I was curious, the additional funds needed, did it come in over budget or is that part of the plan?
So far, we are in budget based on the design, but we're still leading up to that $12 million figure.
Okay. Further questions from council members?
Yes, I have one.
Yes. Councilmember Bergan?
Oh, Sure. I think
Sorry.
might have been first.
Oh, Coombs.
Just real quick,
Sorry.
sorry. Parks. So if that's typical that parks would pay for improvements versus just coming out of water?
The scope of this project, while the specific water improvements, the realigning of the channel and the water quality pond will be funded by water, there are additional, I'll call them bells and whistles, that have been requested by the neighboring properties and parks. Some programmatic elements that are going into that space, a soccer field, an amphitheater for things were proposed. I'm actually not quite sure where the design is sitting right now, but there are items above and beyond the water quality improvements that Parks is contributing directly to.
Okay, and if you mention amphitheater, would that not be the developer? Or would that
I actually don't think that that was selected. I mentioned that in error. They were talking about using some sort of stepped feature into the water quality pond, which I don't think is now being pursued.
Sam is correct. And sorry, Sam, just because I do have a little bit more information.
Oh, please.
I know she's
Yes,
in
thank you.
the Mile High space, and I've been in the design process a little bit more. But so really, it's a linear park improvement. So it's path, trails, it's the soccer field, it's and there is a portion of the project that is being funded by the developers. There's a small portion that they're contributing because there is a benefit to some prevented erosion that's going to be happening on their site. So they're also involved financially in the overall project. This IGA represents the kind of the municipal or government funding associated with the project. Okay. And back to what Sam had mentioned before, it's the $12 million, similar to the First Creek pond. We've just been saving up money to try to hit what the overall project cost is. It's a similar process that we're doing with this project.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Councilmember Coombs?
Yeah, so just some follow-up on that developer contribution. So the 600,000 total that'll be coming from parks that's not covered by the open space grant, is any of that coming from fees on developers for the development of that area, or is that coming from just our kind of parks development budget?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure, Marshall, if you know how the financing for PROS works. I would assume that from the development fund is how some of those are contributed. I'm afraid I'm not aware of how their financing specifically works.
Isn't it impact fees?
Yeah, we couldn't follow up and try to get a breakdown.
I do actually have that answer. 350,000 of their contribution are coming from the park development fees from that area, and 250,000 of their contribution is coming from their Westerly Creek improvement bucket.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're muted, Councilmember Sundberg.
Geez, I'm having a hard time technically today, guys. Forgive me. So moving on to Alex with the aquatic nuisance species prevention.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
You can hear me now. Okay.
Yes.
I had to join by phone to hear everyone on the call, but it sounds like you can hear me through the computer, so that's a little confusing. Okay.
Just fine.
Thank you. So the first contract that I'm going to be talking about is the aquatic nuisance prevention agreement with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. This agreement is not new in the context that Aurora has been helping prevent the invasion of aquatic nuisance species for some time at reservoirs that are important to us. There are a couple of aquatic nuisance species that are of particular concern, and these are the quagga and the zebra mussels. If I had thought about it before right now, I would have dug out some photographs to show you what these mussels can do. They're very little, but they are very profligate. They just reproduce like crazy, and they can completely obstruct infrastructure. And because they are I think they're Chinese species, Asian species, probably would be a better way to say that. I'm not sure they're from China. They're Asian species that are noxious non-natives. They have no natural predator. And once they become established, it is very, very difficult to get rid of them. The Great Lakes struggle with the zebra and quagga mussels and have for many, many years, and to the tune of tens of millions of dollars to protect infrastructure. Colorado has been very lucky and very good. A number of entities have been focused on preventing the invasion of noxious non-native aquatic nuisance species. Unfortunately, we now have them in Colorado. There's a reservoir where Colorado Parks and Wildlife is applying treatments right now. It's the first time we've had aquatic nuisance species in Colorado, and they generally are transmitted by boats. So any reservoir where there's recreation is a reservoir at risk. So this agreement is going to allow the federal agencies to participate and confirm Aurora's continued participation in funding boat inspections, which is very important to ensure that boats don't bring species into the lakes. And that's what this agreement does. Are there any questions?
Questions for Alex? Yes, Councilmember Bergan.
Yeah, I was wondering, you know, this has come up so many years in terms of when we go to DC and lobby our congressional delegation, both through the city's lobbying trip and then through also Accelerate Colorado. And we have, we've brought this to the attention of Senator Bennett and others in our congressional delegation. So the monies that we're getting to mitigate this, or at least to do the boat inspections, is that part of what was allocated through the federal government to the state, or are we still seeking that money?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure which train of funds are coming towards this particular agreement. I can certainly follow up and find out, but I'm not sure.
We had literally one-to-one meetings with Senator Bennett. He was very, it was interesting because he actually brought out a sample of the nuisance species that he had, I don't know, put into some sort of, you know, solid block. So I would think he pushed to get that funding, but I just didn't know if it ever happened. So
Senator Bennett has been very supportive of this issue. He completely gets it and understands the potential impact of what happens should these mussels get, invade a particular reservoir. So he has been very supportive. I just don't know off the top of my head which stream of funding this is coming from, whether it's from Senator Bennett's efforts or whether it's just the general constant push that we've been a part of in terms of getting every agency to step up and participate in the funding and making sure that these happen. I'm not sure.
Other than the boat inspections, is there a way to, is there a way to get rid of it once it's in the reservoirs?
There is.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Marshall.
Sorry. Yeah, it's very intensive. It's chemical application, and the water bodies that get affected, if you're going to try to fully eliminate these things, typically they get taken offline for an extended period of time. High levels of chemicals get applied to destroy the mussels and their larvae. So there is an article out there about applications for a reservoir in western Colorado where they had to take it offline, I think last year, and apply the chemicals aggressively, and they're hoping to get it opened back up. But it's a really intensive chemical application process if you're going to get rid of it out of a water body.
You can't just scrape it off.
These things, as Alex mentioned, these things proliferate proliferate like crazy, and the larvae get everywhere throughout the water body. So yeah, you can't, there's not a physical way to get rid of them.
And
You
there's
have
not
to.
another species that will eat it?
No.
No,
Well,
okay.
yeah, and there may be some species that eat them. I'm not 100% sure, but there's no species that's been identified to control these, to eat enough of them to get rid of them or control them. I'm not 100% sure. I thought I'd seen something that said they're not a good food source for any other known species, but I might be wrong on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Further questions for Alex on this? All right, moving on with Alex again. Appropriate Waters of the State of Colorado resolution.
Yeah, so this is probably a slightly newish subject for Water Policy Committee and probably for Council as a whole. So I'll start from the beginning, and if you already know this, I apologize for being a little redundant. A water rights appropriation in its simplest form is the diversion of water and the application of that water to beneficial use. So in the early days when someone wanted to appropriate water, they would simply trot down to their nearest stream, dig a ditch, and divert the water and then apply it to beneficial use. That diversion provided several elements that are necessary to actually appropriate a water right. And those elements are the intent to appropriate a water right and open physical acts. The open physical act has to manifest that intent and provide notice to the world that a water right is being appropriated. So as the law developed, and many projects, primarily for municipalities, but also for farming and mining projects became bigger and more complicated, acquiring a water right wasn't as easy as simply diverting the water the moment you needed it and applying to beneficial use. And they created what you all know as conditional water rights. And a conditional water right doesn't have the act of physically diverting water, because you may need to build a long pipeline, or you may need to build a reservoir, which can take many, many years, or you may need to grow into a need for it, but you want to be able to plan for the future. So conditional water rights allow the formation of intent and the notice of that intent to be created in a way that's not the physical manifestation on the ground of digging a ditch. Though particularly in years gone by, that intent could be created by planting a sign next to the stream where your diversion point was going to be. So people would go post the stream and they'd put a sign up that said, City of Aurora intends to appropriate water at this spot. And that constituted an overt act that operated as intent. It's become the generally accepted and more sort of efficient way to manifest intent and to complete the first step through the filing of a water court application. So a water court application provides both notice to the world and the manifestation of the intent. In our water court cases, we often have our changing water rights that have already been appropriated and are already absolute water rights. And in those changes, we will often want to appropriate a new exchange or a new storage or a new diversion, and we will want to appropriate a new water right as well, generally pretty junior. And at that time, it becomes important for the city to manifest its intent, specifically if that intent is for a conditional water right that we're not going to be physically acting on right away. Our attorneys have had over the years a difference of opinion as to when and how often City Council must declare its intent to appropriate water. Certainly your intent is declared every time we file a water rights application that constitutes intent and notice and completes the first step. The boots and suspenders, or belts and suspenders, role was to post signs, have a resolution by council, and file the application, and therefore cover all possible bases by which we might be showing intent. In thinking about just the workload of council and how we move these applications along, what we are recommending is that council very clearly say we intend to appropriate all the water rights that are necessary for the city to meet its needs, and then designate the action of the physical act, the overt act of manifesting that intent through a water court application to the general manager of water. And so that is what this resolution does. It is a declaration by council that your intent to appropriate all water rights is manifest and intended and made, and you're designating the second prong of that that first step, the overt act, to the general manager to take at the specific times that we would file water court applications.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions for Alex?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Coombs.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. This just allows for that initial step of saying, yes, we want to appropriate water, and would allow us to go to water court. So if we were to not pass this, then every time you all want to file something in water court, then council would have to basically make this type of resolution before you all initiate the process of negotiating for water rights. And this allows you to begin negotiating and then bring your findings and information to council. Is that the basic idea?
Yes, so the nuance there is once we go to water court, by filing a water court application, that notices the city's intent to apply for the water rights. The question, one of the questions is, what date does the appropriation relate back to? So technically, whenever we file the water court application, that's the date. It's really clear. It's really easy. There, if people wanted to argue, it's really more of a risk. And I think it's well, it depends on how litigious people are, but people could argue that the city had not formalized its intent and therefore we needed a resolution, and then they could delay proceedings by requiring us to come back and get a resolution. And that's been the belt and suspenders, is let's make sure we dotted every single I, where generally the water court application also manifests your intent, and this just makes it very clean and very straightforward and not subject to any questions from water right opposers.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. So this doesn't enable you all to, take actions to acquire water, or it doesn't enable you to kind of finalize any water rights discussions without the approval of council. Council still has to ultimately approve all of the water rights purchases and leases that we undertake. So this is just helping to make the legal process smooth as we're going through.
So right now, I believe BPM 414 requires council approval on all water right purchases over $1 million, but it does allow the general manager to approve purchases that are under $1 million. And then those are reported back to council in case you have questions or concerns, but they're reported on the quarterly report. This piece really goes to appropriating new water rights. So it's not related to purchases. If we buy a water right, yes, council, of course, has to approve that. And the intent prong is not relevant because the water right is already absolute and has already been adjudicated. we have to go through a change case. But this intents prong only goes to new appropriations of water rights where we are creating a water right that didn't exist in the past, if that makes sense.
That does. And so again, though, it doesn't enable you all to take action without approval of council. I think that's the main thing I want to make sure is clear to the public, is that we're not saying, you guys do whatever you want, we're not going to have oversight, and that this doesn't create anything like that. It just, again, helps smooth the legal process, but we would still have to approve the new water rights and kind of the city's financial contribution to those new water rights. As long as it's above that, as long as it's within existing policy around water rights acquisition.
So, yeah, and so I think in terms of new water rights, the process is through the court process, and of course the city attorney's office is deeply engaged, and so those, I don't think council has, well, I'm not sure what the past has been, any financial fiscal issue related to water rights, you know, above it, under the current procedures would, of course, you guys approve the budget, you see what is going to be spent in terms of what would be necessary to actually make a water right absolute and to bring that water into the system. All of that would still be coming through council, absolutely. That would not change it. I'm struggling a little bit because I'm in the water court applications for the change cases, which is where this comes up. You know, we may need to, if we have a change case, let's say the Brantner change case, whenever we change an existing water right, we are required to maintain stream conditions that existed under the previous use of that right. So I think you are all familiar with the idea that we will take a right that has previously been used in irrigation, and because it's been used in irrigation, there are return flows associated with that use that have to be maintained. So often we need to build a little pond or use a storage bucket to store water and then release it at the time to mimic those previous return flows and to ensure that those return flows stay as much as possible what they were under the previous use. And then the city gets to take the consumptive use amount associated with that irrigation right and put that into our system and use that for municipal purposes. So in the context of these change cases, sometimes we need to, in order to be able to make sure that the stream flow regimes stay the same, we might need a storage right, a new storage right that didn't previously exist. And so we will appropriate a new right. And so that new right will be a right to store water in X amount at this location and use it for this purpose. And in that appropriation, because the bucket may not be built right away, or we're not going to change it for 10 years, we're doing the change case, but we're not going to actually physically change the water for 10 years. What we are appropriating is a conditional water right. And when you appropriate a conditional water right, you have to form intent. So you have to like say, I want to do this, and then you have to do an overt physical manifestation of that intent. The water court application is both of those pieces for purposes of meeting the legal test. The question that has been in the past is, do you additionally need that council resolution to say, we are intend to appropriate this storage right associated with this change case? And I don't believe that those questions have come specifically to council, like in that form all the time. I think they have at times and sometimes haven't at times, because they're generally what's necessary to make the change cases work. Does that make sense? So yes, council, you always have oversight. Whether those specific questions have come to you in the past, I'm not sure that they always have. So I don't know if you have drilled down into that type of detail before. And what we're suggesting here is that that type of detail is not necessary for you to drill down into because you still have oversight for the whole thing.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I just want to make sure that there's not any sense in which folks think we're going to be giving up oversight that we currently have over the process, especially given how contentious water is at this point, and how important and complicated that it is, that we're not, as a council signing away our right to have oversight where we typically have had oversight over these processes. And it sounds like that's not what's going on. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. So I think assuming that the Water Policy Committee council members are comfortable with moving this to study, we will work a little bit more on that idea and fleshing it out clearly for your consideration.
Thank you, Alex. Councilmember Bergan.
I have a question. Hopefully it's a short answer because I got lost in all of that.
Sorry. I can do a PowerPoint too.
Alex was flushing it out, which is a good term to use in the water department.
Right. So now I'm not sure if I remember my question. If this has nothing to do with if we're not using the water that we have a water right to, does this also give the general manager that authority to renegotiate? We had that situation years back where we were challenged because we had the water rights, but we did not, we weren't consuming it. We weren't using it. And so we were possibly going to lose our water rights. This has nothing to do with that portion.
You're correct, Councilmember Bergan. So your concern, that issue is the abandonment of water rights when they're not used or not used in the appropriate manner or the decreed manner, really. And I believe the Busk-Ivanhoe rights had an issue where they had not been decreed in a particular manner, and the city was using them in that manner for 25 years without changing the decree, and that did open us to a risk of abandonment. This does not have anything to do with abandonment. So in the statute book, they're side by side. You have the intent to appropriate, the first step, and then abandonment is the next section of the statute. So, but they are totally different issues. Yes.
Okay. Very good. I think that was all I had on this. And if we were to sell water rights, that also would come to council.
Yeah,
actually water rights has to go to the people.
Yeah.
No. Go ahead, Marshall. I'm sorry.
I was going to say we can't sell water rights. So.
Oh, okay.
We can, and you may be thinking we've traded water rights for equivalent or better value water rights that work in our system, but we technically can't sell water rights without, as Alex said, going out to a vote.
Okay. So yeah, I think I was thinking of when we traded. Okay.
And trades would have to come to council for anything that we do interesting like that would have to come to council for authorization as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else we need to flesh out? Oh, Alex, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, well, there's no acute time issue here. And so if council members would be more comfortable with a clear PowerPoint, I could bring it back next month with a PowerPoint, or I could just do that to at study, whichever you prefer.
How do you feel, council members? Are you comfortable moving this forward? Would you like to see more visual information?
I'm comfortable.
I'd be comfortable at study. That's fine.
Myself as well. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
All right, item number 7, Strontia Springs deep sediment removal has been pulled from the agenda. Apparently, Denver water was not quite ready to move forward. Moving on to 8, consideration to appoint 1 member and reappoint 3 members to the Metro Water Recovery District Board. Marshall.
Yeah, thank you. So every year we have to pretty much come to council and keep track of our Metro Board appointments. We have 6 representatives of the city that represent us on the Metro Water. I think we used to call it Metro Wastewater. Now it's Metro Water Recovery, I think. So a little bit of kind of an interesting situation this year. We've historically had kind of a balance between staff that council has appointed and citizens with significant interest or history that adds value to the process. A lot of those have been ex-council members historically. But not always. So we've had some citizens that have been appointed in the past that have not been ex-council members. The example that would be probably at the top of your mind that everybody could relate to would be John Dingus, for example, was a resident who had significant value history, was a resident and served on the board. George Dumas might not be quite as familiar, but he also was a resident that had not been an elected official. So, but we've always tried to maintain that balance of close to half staff appointments and half citizens or with significant history and expertise in the world of water reclamation or ex-council members. So this board doesn't work quite like the other boards. We typically don't publish or advertise the appointments. We work with within our people the circle of people we're familiar with and check and see who might be interested. And then historically, I make recommendations. Those recommendations go to council and council makes the appointments. So we do have some expiring terms this year, and we have 1 ex-council member who has had some health issues, and so he's needing to step down. The expiring terms are Greg Baker, Joanne Giddings, Nadine Caldwell, and Bob Roth. Greg and Joanne are both currently, or had been, this is where it's a little interesting this year, had been employees of Aurora Water and had been appointed by council to serve. Nadine and Bob Roth were both ex-council members. Bob Roth, again, has had some health issues, and so he's needing to step away from the board. So it leaves us with 1 vacancy, and as you know, Joanne Gidding has retired. Joanne is actually in the leadership rotation at Metro. I think currently serving as secretary or treasurer, and has expressed an interest to continue serving on the board as a resident, adding value and continuing through that leadership rotation. I am supportive of that. Joanne has done a good job representing us. And if her residency situation changes, that would change things. It does have a residency requirement, but she's planning on staying here. And I think we'll do a good job representing Aurora, continuing to rotate through the leadership positions. I think my understanding is when she has the opportunity to serve in the chairman or president role, she might be interested in that time at reevaluating. But my recommendation would be to reappoint Greg Baker, Joanne, and Nadine. But as Joanne is shifting now into more of the resident type role with significant history and experience, I would recommend that we replace Bob Roth with Marina Lurch, who is our new Deputy Director of Field Services in Water. There's Marina right there, has responsibility for the wastewater collection system and will be living this world on a daily basis, has a little bit in the past as well. So that's my recommendation. It's a little bit interesting because with Joanne retiring and then shifting into a slightly different role, it looks a little different than these appointments maybe have in the past, but that's where I would recommend we go. And if you're supportive, would move that forward, but also happy to have any discussion or answer any questions related to our representation
I believe
at Metro.
I'm happy to move
Good.
it forward. Anyone
Good.
else? All right,
I'm good with
fantastic.
that.
Okay, thank you, Marshall.
Absolutely.
And number 9, Greg Baker, Citizens Water Advisory Committee restructure update.
Okay, and Greg and I have been emailing back and forth about this discussion. So Greg is here. I'll take the lead initially, and then Greg can jump in. We came to water policy, I can't remember exactly, probably 3 or 4 months ago, with the idea of restructuring or refocusing really the Citizen Water Advisory Committee to be a little more active in the water, kind of the water speculation world. We get a lot of proposals that come to us that are kind of interesting, that people want to make sure, the proposers want to make sure are fully vetted, sometimes going beyond the staff vetting process. So we had proposed a few areas to have the Citizen Water Advisory Committee more engaged in. We got feedback from the Water Policy Committee that you were comfortable with 1 or 2 of those areas, but maybe not quite as comfortable with 1 or 2 of the other areas. So we've refocused and trimmed back the refocus of the Citizen Water Advisory Committee to be on just the couple of things you were comfortable with. We've backed the other couple of things out. So annexations, we had talked about water supply related to annexations. Those will continue to go through the existing process and not have the Citizen Water Advisory Committee focused on those, as well as extraterritorial service agreements that we originally had proposed to have them engaged in those discussions. But based on water policy, the discussion last time, we've backed that out as well. So they would be primarily now focused on the more speculative type proposals that come to Aurora when staff has reviewed those proposals and is not recommending moving forward with them. If the proposer would like additional vetting, those would then be routed over to the Citizen Water Advisory Committee. So we've incorporated those changes in the ordinance. We've taken the redraft of the ordinance back to the existing Citizen Water Advisory Committee. They are supportive of the current language and draft. There is one piece that we felt it would be worth a discussion with water policy to get your thoughts and guidance on. This committee is also appointed by council. The current process and the way we go through coming up with committee members is we have used the existing Citizen Water Advisory Committee to vet applications. This one, different than Metro, is a public process. We invite anybody interested to apply. We take a look at the applications, but staff doesn't really vet them very much. Historically, what's happened is we route those over to the existing committee members. They do the vetting, and then they make recommendations to council, and council makes the appointments. With this refocus, we will be looking for slightly more, I guess, foundational expertise in the water rights and water supply world. So we've built a little bit of that focus in, but wanted to verify with with this committee whether or not you're comfortable with the existing vetting process. We will often, again, after the Citizen Water Advisory Committee members do the vetting and make their recommendations, we can definitely bring those to water policy, as we've done in the past, for confirmation or thoughts before they move forward. Are there any changes you would like to see made in that process, or are you comfortable with us proceeding that same direction?
Any changes or ideas? Councilmember Bergan?
Yeah, I'm fine as long as, I think I read it said 7 members that would be residents and then 2 that were maybe more technical. I think, well,
Sorry,
I was
if I
going to say,
might.
I want to make sure that residents have an opportunity to be on the water policy committee. They don't need to have a degree in water. They don't need to have, it's nice to have some knowledge, but, and I think most people that apply, A, usually have a little bit of background, and B, have obviously an interest. So I just want to make sure that we keep that open for residents. I did not like the change of the name to Water Supply Committee, because if you read what they're still doing, they're still looking at the budget. They're still going to look at water rates. And so they're not only looking at supply. So I'm fine with all the changes except the name. I think it should just be kept Citizen Water Advisory Committee.
We can absolutely do that. And you are right.
Otherwise, it
We'll still be
restricts it.
looking
It's
at-
just supply, and that's not what it's about.
Okay, we can definitely, well, I don't see any reason we couldn't preserve the name like it is. Greg,
Yeah.
any?
I mean,
Yeah, I think everybody's fine with that. Matter of fact, that was probably the one thing the committee also noted was the name change, though I don't think they felt that strongly about it.
So we can do that. I will say so you're right, it is 7 residents,
Mhm.
and we will be looking for not necessarily a degree, even though if they have a degree, that's fine. But that would not be a requirement. What we'd be looking for, again, is familiarity and understanding, similar to what we've looked at before. But there is a little more, we'll probably build in a few additional questions relative to water supply and their understanding of water supply because of the addition of that into the committee responsibilities. The 2 are commercial entities, so they would face similar, that have to represent commercial interests in Aurora, wouldn't have to be degreed necessarily, but would have to have the same familiarity.
And for clarification on the commercial side, the member itself would, or representative on the committee would not need to be a resident of Aurora or a customer of Aurora Water, which is a requirement for the residential side, but they would need to represent a commercial ratepayer. For example, our current commercial member is the vice chancellor for the Anschutz campus. So Anschutz campus is our representation for Aurora, even though the vice chancellor does not live within the city boundaries. So clarification on that. And to your point, Councilmember Bergan, on the qualifications, I think we have an excellent balance right now on the committee. And so I think you would see, even though there is a reappointment or reapplication process here, I think you see interest from most of the committee to reapply and continue in that role. So we would have that diversity. We like that diversity as well. We cover the entire spectrum of careers and education, even across board boundaries as well right now. So it gives us a good representation of our citizenry. So we'd want to maintain that absolutely.
Remind me what the term is.
Right now it's 3-year terms, 3-3-year terms. So
Which
I do
is
need
good because it takes a while to kind of get familiar.
It does, and I need to talk with the clerk's office and city attorney's office to figure out not only what the new terms would be for this committee, also by being a new iteration of this committee, does that reset a term? So that was one advantage, I think, of having the other name. It really does become a standalone new committee, and you could say you are now resetting at 0 rather than in your 3rd term. And I don't know the answer to that. That and the appointment process, because Marshall and I were emailing back and forth before, we'd never built a committee from scratch like this. So we need to figure out what that initial appointment process is so that we maintain that stagger that council has asked for. So you're not appointing the entire committee every 3 years.
Right.
Yeah, so a little bit of detail we need to pursue with the city clerk's office and city attorney's office, but those are relatively easy.
Great. Any further questions on the topic of the advisory committee?
I just have a comment.
Yes.
So I understand the value of experience, and at the same time, I wouldn't support resetting all the term limits, because if we're going to just do that, we might as well not have them. I think that's important for people to have opportunities to be involved that haven't yet had that opportunity. So yeah, I just, even if we were to rename, I wouldn't support resetting the term limits of the existing member.
And I'll make that clear. Again, I just wasn't certain if there's already a precedent in place that influences this. I don't know if we've ever sunsetted a committee and reestablished a similar committee like this. So I'll work with the city clerk's office on it then. But that's a valid point. I agree. I mean, there's a reason you have term limits in place. On the other hand, we do like to, it takes typically a full 3-year term before committee members actually feel comfortable enough with the topic, especially in something as complex as water, that they can fully engage. So it's always that balance point. So.
Yeah, Councilmember Sundberg.
Yes.
So as far as any issues with, I don't know about the sunsetting and starting new, but I know we did have committees where there were some term limit issues that were going to cause kind of excessive vacancies that we did kind of approve as a council at that time, some exceptions. So that's always a possibility. But in addition, if you guys felt that 4 terms instead of 3 terms made more sense, I think that would be a reasonable discussion to have. Just, I think, again, the reset kind of takes away the purpose of having term limit.
I mean, work with the clerk's office on that because their guidance policies have specific term limits on every form of committee. So I want to make sure that we're not skewing that guidance document too much. They've been very active in this already. So as I said, I think we should have a fairly straightforward answer for you by next committee meeting. So.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions or concerns about the committee? Just an update. Appreciate it. Thank you, Greg and Marshall. Miscellaneous matters for consideration. This weekend, I ran into Sherry from the water education, and I was given this dog from Aurora Water. I think this is Greg Baker approved. It's a dog waste dispenser. So
it is our most popular piece of swag we
like
have,
that
trust
stuff.
me. So.
Yeah. Got all kinds of tools and trades. And Councilmember Bergan, I might just pass this on to you. Any other members? What's that?
Might need it.
Yeah, practical, very practical. How is that going, the education within our schools?
It's going fantastic. Matter of fact, we probably should schedule Natalie Browercurtain, our supervisor in that area, to present to you on that. And I believe everybody received the invitation for the Youth Water Festival on November 15th. So if you can attend, even if you can just attend some of the classes, it's an incredible opportunity to see 1,000 fifth graders in one place in contained energy. But frankly, they're also very enthusiastic about water through their master program. So I'll talk with Marshall and we'll tee up a presentation to this committee as well in the future on that. So.
I think that would be interesting. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other miscellaneous matters from anyone? All right, we are ahead of schedule. Councilmember Coombs, thank you for starting the meeting while I was running a bit late there with my operator error, most likely. And have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, and the May 17th, next meeting.
Already.